I can see your eyes on me, you're waiting, you want to know why I did it. It's strange, isn't it, how a story like mine can start so quietly. No gunshot. No screaming. Just a life slowly dissolving into something unrecognizable. I used to be someone else, someone soft, someone you could walk past in a crowded market and never remember. Back then, I was just Mama Grace, a widow, a woman whose hands were always stained with the red dust of our village roads, whose clothes smelled faintly of wood smoke because the only heat in my home came from the cooking fire. I wasn't special. I wasn't beautiful. I wasn't the kind of woman people stopped to look at. My skin was deep and cracked from years under the sun. My shoulders had begun to bend forward from carrying water and baskets and grief. And my voice was always low, as if I had been whispering to myself for decades. People didn't see me, not really. I used to think that was a blessing. You can hide better when no one notices you. But you can also be erased without anyone realizing you were ever here. My son, David, was the only reason I didn't just let life swallow me whole. He was my miracle, my pride. I'd raised him alone after his father died in the oil field accident. I scraped cassava to sell, sewed torn clothes for neighbors, and washed other people's laundry until my hands were raw. Everything I made went into David's education. He was going to be the one who left this place, went to the city, got a good job, and sent for me so I could finally rest, and in a way he did, but not how I imagined. When David moved to Lagos, I mortgaged my small land to help him pay his rent. It wasn't much, but it was something. I told myself the debt was worth it. I told myself I would work a little harder until he was steady. I didn't complain. Not once. The farm creaks above me now, and the sound feels like the groan of my own bones. The first year, he came home for Christmas. He brought gifts, clothes, a radio, sweet biscuits in a tin. I remember sitting outside with the radio pressed to my ear like it was a baby, listening to music I'd never heard before. My neighbors looked at me differently that year. I felt proud. The second year, he said work was too busy. But he sent money. I told myself it was fine. I cooked the Christmas food alone, eating in silence while the fire died beside me. The third year, he didn't call until late in the evening. He said, "Mama, you weren't expecting me for Christmas, right?" You weren't expecting me. The word sat in my stomach like. The first year, he came home for Christmas. He brought gifts, clothes, a radio, sweet biscuits in a tin. I remember sitting outside with the radio pressed to my ear like it was a baby, listening to music I'd never heard before. My neighbors looked at me differently that year. I felt proud. The second year, he said work was too busy. But he sent money. I told myself it was fine. I cooked the Christmas food alone, eating in silence while the fire died beside me. The third year, he didn't call until late in the evening. He said, "Mama, you weren't expecting me for Christmas, right?" You weren't expecting me. The word sat in my stomach like stones. I told him, of course, I was. You are my only child. He laughed, lightly, distracted. He said something about flights being too expensive, about his friends having plans. That laugh, that careless laugh, it stayed in my ears for weeks. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The only light came from the dying embers in the fire pit. My house was quiet, but my head was loud. Every word he'd ever said, every promise he'd ever made, replayed over and over until it felt like they were mocking me. Do you know what loneliness tastes like? It's metallic, like sucking on a coin. It dries your mouth and makes your tongue heavy. That night, I walked out. I asked him how I could cancel the payment. His eyes flickered, confused. Madam, you mean stop paying? You could lose your land. Yes, I said. My voice was steady. Too steady. I mean exactly that. I watched him write something down. I signed the papers. My hands didn't shake. I felt light. When I walked out, the sun was brighter than usual. The road home seemed shorter. My chest felt empty in a way that was almost peaceful, but peace is a funny thing. It can be the mask that hides something much darker. I didn't know it yet, but that morning was the last time I would be only Mama Grace. It began the day the bank took my land. I stood outside the manager's office while he spoke to the men from the city. Their voices were low, clipped, too formal to be about anything good. I watched their polished shoes tap against the tile floor, their gold watches catching the light. When he finally called me in, his face was stretched into that practiced sympathy people wear when they're telling you something you're supposed to accept without fighting. He slid a single folder across the desk. Madam Grace, he said, you understand the situation now, yes? The mortgage is terminated. The property is reclaimed. Reclaimed, like it had ever belonged to him. I didn't speak, I just stared at the paper. My name was there, printed neatly beside the word defaulter. A name I'd carried since birth, now branded with shame. Sign here, he added, tapping the line. I did. The pen scratched across the page, my handwriting smaller than usual, as if it were trying to hide from the ink. When I stepped outside, the sun was hot enough to sting my skin. I started walking home. It should have been a 30-minute walk, but my feet moved without sense of time. The road was dusty, the air thick with the smell of diesel from passing motorcycles. Somewhere in the distance, a woman's voice was calling for her child to come inside. But all I could hear was my son's laugh. That laugh from the phone, it was getting louder. Louder until it drowned out everything else. When I reached the edge of my property, there were men already there, cutting down the small banana trees I had planted years ago. One of them paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at me briefly, then kept walking, not a word, not a greeting, just the thought of his machete biting into wood. I wanted to scream. To push them away. But my voice, it felt buried somewhere deep inside my ribs. By evening, the front yard was bare. My little home stood alone, like an old tooth in a decaying mouth. I sat by the cooking fire, my eyes fixed on the empty space where the banana trees had been. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bank papers. I saw my son in a city apartment, eating, laughing, surrounded by people. I imagined the sound of his voice telling someone, my mother. She's fine. She understands. Understands. The next morning, I decided to call him. My fingers shook as I dialed. It rang 3 times before he picked up. Hello, Mama, he said, his tone rushed. I could hear voices in the background. Laughter. Music. David, I whispered. The bank. They took the land. There was a pause. Then he sighed. Mama, I told you this would happen if you stopped paying. But it's okay. You'll manage. You're strong. Strong, that word, it didn't comfort me. It burned. Because strong meant alone. Strong meant disposable. David, I said slowly, I gave up everything for you. I know, he replied. And I'm grateful. But I can't fix everything. Look, I have to go now. Merry Christmas, okay? The line went dead before I could answer. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended, listening to the empty static. The fire beside me had burned out. The air was cool, but my chest felt tight and hot. And then it happened, the thing I can't explain, not with logic, not with any human words. It started as a low hum in my ears. At first, I thought it was the ceiling fan again, but this was different. It was inside me. Growing. The sound became a vibration, running through my bones, calling in my stomach, filling my lungs. I looked at my hands, they were steady now. Too steady, the hum became a voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It spoke directly into the hollow places in me, the places that had been carved out by years of sacrifice and silence. He doesn't deserve you. I stood. My shadow stretched across the floor, longer than it should have been. The air in the room shifted, heavier. Warmer. My breath came slow and even, like I was saving it for something. I walked outside. The moon was hanging low, swollen and yellow, its light painting everything in strange, soft shapes. The men had left. The land was quiet. But I could feel something. It was like the soil was breathing. I knelt and placed my hands on the ground. The hum in my bones matched something beneath my palms, a deep, ancient pause that had been waiting, patient, silent, and in that moment, I remembered a story my grandmother once told me when I was a child. A story about the earth spirits that lived beneath our feet. They were not gods. They were older than gods. They didn't care for prayers or worship. They cared for balance. And when balance was broken, they chose someone to fix it. My grandmother had looked me in the eyes that night and said, "If they ever choose you, child, do not refuse them. They don't ask twice." I didn't refuse. The hum became a throb. My vision blurred for a second, then cleared. The air smelled different, richer, like the scent before rain. I knew what I had to do, and it began with my son, not with his death, not yet, but with the way I began to think of him. Before that night, David had always been my child. My reason. My proof that I had done something right in this world, no matter how small. But under that swollen moon, with the hum in my bones and the earth's quiet heartbeat under my palms, something inside me tilted. He was no longer my child, he was an equation, and equations could be balanced. The next day, I woke before the first rooster's cry. The sky was still heavy with darkness, the air damp from the night. I wrapped my faded wrapper around my waist, tied my scarf, and walked to the river. My feet knew the path well, but that morning, it felt different, like the trees were leaning in, their branches closing over me. When I reached the water, I knelt and cupped it in my hands. It was cold, sharp against my skin. I whispered into it, not a prayer, but something older, a sound I didn't recognize until it left my mouth. It wasn't my voice, it was deeper, layered, like more than one person was speaking through me. The water rippled without wind. In its surface, my reflection blinked back at me, but it wasn't exactly mine. My skin was darker in the reflection, my eyes too bright, too knowing. The lines on my face, etched by years of work, had shifted, forming shapes I couldn't name but somehow understood. My grandmother's voice slid into my memory, soft but firm. "They don't ask twice." I didn't need them to. From that moment, I stopped moving like a victim. My steps were slower, deliberate, as though the ground needed to feel me before I passed. I began to watch people differently, not as neighbors or strangers, but as moving weights in a scale I could tip at will. For 3 days, I didn't speak to anyone. I stayed inside, grinding cassava slowly, listening to the rhythm of the pestle hitting the mortar. The sound became a heartbeat in my mind, sinking with the throb in my bones. On the fourth day, I called David. I didn't tell him about the land. I didn't beg for help. I simply asked him when he would be home again. His voice was casual, almost bored. "Mama, maybe Easter. Or next Christmas. Things are busy." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Yes," I said, "things are always busy." That night, the hum in my chest became clearer. It wasn't just a sound, it was a map. A web of connections, stretching from me to others. And one thread pulsed warmer than the rest. His thread, I touched it in my mind and felt. Everything, the texture of his apartment walls. The faint smell of perfume that didn't belong to me. The sound of glasses clinking in the background. His laugh, careless, bright, not meant for me anymore. For the first time, I felt no pain hearing it. Only direction. The next week, I went to the market, but not for food. I walked past the stalls, past the smells of fried plantain and dried fish, until I reached the old woman who sold charms and herbs. She looked up as I approached, her milky eyes clouded but sharp in some other way. "You've been chosen," she said before I spoke. I didn't ask how she knew. "What do you need?" she asked. I told her, not in detail. Just enough for her to reach into a wooden box and pull out 3 small clay pots, sealed with black wax. "Don't open them until the moon is red," she said. "And when you do, don't look away. Even for a blink." I carried them home wrapped in cloth. They felt heavier than they should have been. Each one warm as though it had been sitting in sunlight. I placed them under my bed and waited. The days blurred. I moved like a shadow, speaking little, watching everything. My neighbors whispered about me, saying my eyes looked different now, that I seemed taller, though I hadn't grown. And then, one evening, the sky bled into a strange, deep orange. By nightfall, the moon hung low and red, exactly as the woman had said. I lit no lamps. The only light was the moon spilling through the doorway. I took the first clay pot, sat cross-legged on the floor, and cracked the wax with my thumbnail. The lid came off with a sigh, yes, a sigh, like air escaping from a mouth. Inside was ash. Fine, dark, and moving as though breathing. I placed my fingers in it. The hum in my body surged. The ash clung to my skin, seeping into my pores, cold and hot at the same time. Images flashed behind my eyes. David, sitting on a couch. A glass in his hand. His eyes on someone I couldn't see. The sound of his voice, sweet, charming, dripping with the same tone he once used for me when he wanted something. The ash told me things. Where he would be. What time? Who would be with him? When I opened my eyes, my hands were clean. The pot was empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I prepared. I wasn't going to kill him yet, no. Revenge without patience is just anger. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was measured. I would take from him as he had taken from me, not all at once, but piece by piece. The first piece would be comfort. I started with his rent. The bank still had my name on certain papers connected to his lease. It took me only 2 quiet visits, 2 signatures, and his automatic payment stopped without his knowing. The second piece would be pride. I spoke to someone I knew in the city, someone who owed me a favor from long ago. Within a week, rumors began to spread at David's workplace. Nothing big at first. Just whispers. But whispers can grow teeth. I didn't need to be there to see it. The hum kept me connected. I felt his confusion, his frustration. I felt the first crack in his certainty that his life was untouchable. One night, as I sat in the dark room where you now see me, I realized something. This power, if that's what you want to call it, it wasn't about spells or curses. It was about alignment. I had aligned myself with something that had always been there, waiting for someone who understood the cost of balance, and I was beginning to enjoy it. David had been the start. But as the hum deepened, I began to sense other threads, people who had taken from me in small, almost invisible ways over the years. The woman who underpaid me for laundry. The man who laughed at my torn slippers. The neighbor who whispered about my widowhood like it was my fault. Each thread called to me, and I answered. The earth spirits, my grandmother's warning, the red moon, the clay pots, it was all part of the same truth. Once you awaken, you cannot go back to sleep, and I was very awake now, but David's thread still paused the strongest, and soon, it would be time to pull it, not tomorrow. Not next week. Now, the hum in my bones was no longer a background sound, it was the only sound. It filled my ears, my chest, my skull. Every heartbeat was in perfect rhythm with something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting for this night since the first seed of betrayal was planted in me. David didn't know yet that the rent had stopped being paid. He didn't know that the whispers at work were no longer just whispers. And he had no idea that I was coming for him, not in the way he would expect, not as the mother who begged or pleaded, but as something colder. I left my home just before midnight. The road to Lagos was long, but I didn't feel the hours. The bus swayed, headlights sweeping over the empty roads, and I sat in silence, hands folded in my lap. The clay pots, two still sealed, rested in my bag. Warm against my leg, when the bus dropped me at the station, the city was a different kind of dark, crowded with shadows that moved even when no one was there. Neon lights buzzed above closed shops. Rats darted between gutters. Somewhere, far off, music thumped like a distant heartbeat. I knew where to go. The ash had told me, David lived in a tall building with a glass front door that reflected the street like a black mirror. I stood across from it, watching the night guard drift into sleep. When the moment was right, I crossed the street without a sound, my feet barely touching the ground. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just walked inside. The elevator was slow, humming in a way that felt almost like it knew me. On the 5th floor, I stepped into a hallway lined with thick carpet. My shadow stretched along the walls, bending unnaturally around corners. I stopped at his door. Number 5B, the hum in my bones sharpened into something like a blade. I reached into my bag and took out the second clay pot. The wax was black, unbroken. I cracked it with my thumb, and the lid side open. Inside was something wet. Not water. Thicker. I dipped my fingers in, and when I pulled them out, the substance clung like oil. It smelled faintly of earth and rust. I touched the door handle. The oil spread, soaking into the metal. The hum in my body surged, and for a moment, I felt the door breathing. I knocked. When David opened it, his face froze. Surprise. Confusion. Then guilt. Mama. What? How did you? I stepped inside without asking. My eyes scanned the apartment. It was neat, modern. Too clean, too polished for someone who grew up with red dust on their skin. He closed the door slowly. Mama, you should have called. You can't just show up like this. I turned to him, my voice calm. You weren't expecting me for Christmas. I thought I would surprise you. He laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. Mama, it's just, things are complicated. Complicated, I repeated. My voice felt heavier now, as if each word was being lowered onto the ground like a stone. Is it complicated to remember the one who gave you everything? He sighed. Mama, please, let's not do this right now. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile he'd seen before. I stepped closer. Oh, we are doing this. Right now. When I touched his wrist, the hum leapt from me into him. His eyes widened. His breath caught. What is this? He stammered. It's balance, I said softly. You took my land. My peace. My years. Tonight, I take yours. The oil on the door began to spread along the walls, black veins crawling like roots. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of wet soil. David stumbled back, clutching his chest. Mama, stop, but I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was listening to the hum, to the way it was pulling something from him. Not his life, not yet. But his comfort, his security, his easy laughter. The threads between him and everything he thought he owned began to snap, one by one. I watched him sink to his knees, as wide with the realization that he was no longer untouchable. Why? He gasped. I leaned down, my lips close to his ear. Because you weren't expecting me for Christmas. When I left, the apartment was quiet. The black veins had retreated into the walls, leaving no trace. But I knew he would feel it, the emptiness, the cold. And it would grow, slowly, until there was nothing left for him to hold on to. That was the first, the others came after, each one tailored, each one perfect. The woman who underpaid me found her storeroom infested overnight, everything spoiled. The man who mocked me woke to find his prized goats gone, their hoof prints vanishing into the earth. The neighbor who whispered about me stopped speaking altogether, her voice simply gone one morning. Never to return. One by one, I took back what they owed me, not in coins, in balance, and now, here I am, in this dark room with you. The fan above us still hums, slow and heavy. My hands rest on the table. My nails dig into the wood. You've heard my story. You've seen the threads. And maybe, just maybe, you've begun to wonder about your own. So go ahead, subscribe to this channel so that you never miss any of our videos.